Well, hello. Here we are at the Sober Atheist podcast once again. And we find ourselves at episode 22. And today we're going to talk about something that Michael and I, we've been kicking around a bit. Oh, by the way, my name is John Huey, and I'm here with my co-host, Michael Tingley.
Hello.
Hello. I'm sorry if I kind of flub the intros today, but there you go.
You didn't memorize the script.
Yeah, we don't memorize any script, okay? I mean, I don't have we've got a technical editor, but we have no producer or no team of, people, saying stuff in our ear while we do this. We just wing it as best we can. But and here we are at episode 22. And we're talking about today, the title of this episode is Atheism and Recovery, a fact-based reliance on the visible world. And you might find that sort of a mouthful. Exactly what is that? And, the most concise way I could boil that part down was basing your recovery on what is seen, not what is wished for. Does that seem a good way to kick it off, Michael?
Sure.
We're gonna be able to take off from there.
Yeah. We're looking for evidence.
Yeah. We're not in the hopes and dreams business.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We're in the evidence business, and in the serious business of keeping ourselves alive and helping other people that have issues to stay alive as well. All right. And there's no magic wands involved, but there's sort of a rub. Seems like this information comes from everywhere these days. And and of course, you know this, Michael, because I've been talking about this for the last week or two. I was listening to a exchange on some Facebook group or someplace like that, and read this exchange between people, and it was somebody talking to a psychologist, and I very negligently did not jot down the name of this fellow that he was talking with, but the psychologist on this feed said something very interesting to me, and it was pretty concise and somewhat provocative when this guy said, human beings, and I believe this was in a political context. They were probably talking about politics or something, but it could be in any context, really. Human beings are not convinced by facts. They are convinced by feelings. That was this guy's contention. And I think in the realm that we're talking about, maybe there's something to that, and maybe there isn't. In my own case, when I got started in this thing all those years ago in early 1987, I was being driven by a desperate need to find a solution to a long-standing problem that I was aware of but had never faced. So I found myself at the juncture of needing to be honest and real about what my true situation was, and taking some action based on what that true situation was.
You're talking about your addiction to alcohol.
My absolute devotion to alcohol.
Yeah,
and
devotion is a good word.
To alcohol. And making it my number one priority when I boiled everything down.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike a lot of, I was 38 years old, unlike a lot of people in those circumstances, I had not, it was a very strange trajectory, because I had not gone down on the social scale. I was in the process of going up.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very, for my age without a law degree or a medical degree, with just a humanities bachelor's degree. I had a pretty good job with a large earning potential. And it was a sales job, but a very good one and a very ethical one in the sense that it was capital equipment. It wasn't like day-to-day hustling of small things. And I was pretty good at it. And I knew how things worked in DC, and I was doing well. But the only thing I could do was go to work and come home and drink. And I had lost, my first wife had passed away. I had lost a relationship with a woman that I'd been living with for several years after my uh, first wife died at a very young age. She'd thrown me out of the house. And I was living alone in an okay condo in downtown DC at 17th and R. And the exteriors, I had a car that was paid for that was in the parking garage, and I could go pretty much where I wanted to go and do pretty much what I wanted to do. So from the exterior, uh, you know, as far as prosperity and stability went, it looked okay.
Yeah, the
But
visible evidence
the visible evidence
looked good.
inside me was
Sure.
in total contradiction
Yeah.
because it was utter chaos, disorder, and desperation. And I was so ego driven that I knew that I would never go all the way down the social scale and end up in jail or on the street or anything like that. But I was so desperate that I only had, I was reduced in terms of reality. I was reduced to a binary choice, either live or die.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
There you go.
And if I hadn't been presented with that very clear binary choice and my own decision, I'd never been suicidal in my life before this, but I knew that I wasn't going to go. If I went down much further, I was going to take my own life, and that was going to be it. And I knew that. I knew that to be true. So what propelled me forward were facts. The fact was my life was totally fucked up, and that if I didn't do something about it, it was going to end soon.
Yeah.
And that's when there was, in January 1987, there was no secular or other group to join. And I had briefly looked into this other program, which I will not name, which you may name. Go back and forth with that shit all the time. I will not name that program unless forced. But, I knew about it, and I knew that I sort of thought about it as a shadowy bunch of religious zealots hanging around church basements and that whole trope about what it was. But I was so desperate, I couldn't think of anything else to do because I was in the kind of job I couldn't turn myself into a rehab or anything like that because of the type of work I was doing and the type of people I was working for. And I was kind of an independent guy working for a group of people in California who are not the most socially conscious or understanding group of folks in the world, unlike some people in California.
Well, in general, there weren't a lot of EAPs back then anyway.
No, and there were very few. No, there were a couple. I did meet the person that started the EAP at the State Department later. That was one of the very first ones in Washington. Mm-hmm. But there was certainly no EAP for me, and there was no way out of my situation. Okay, so taking that binary choice, I made some efforts to go to see a group of people that might have known something more about this situation than I did, and people that had maybe achieved some sort of stability in their lives without alcohol. It was pretty straightforward and pretty simple. But when I got there, I started hearing about all this sort of dream world stuff, and I started hearing things like oh, John, you say you're an atheist, but we know, and I've said this before, I'm sure, like a broken record, that we know that sooner or later you're going to get it. Okay, so just keep coming, and sooner or later you'll find the path.
Yeah, because
Okay,
the big book says that.
exactly. And the idea was, that the light would come into the room, and that I would find peace,
Yeah.
and that I would find reformation, and they didn't use the word salvation, but that's what was implied. And I said to myself from the very first, what is this shit? Okay. I just need to get sober. And I looked at my sobriety as a practical endeavor.
Hmm.
And what kept me going to those meetings, uh, well, it was easy. It was downtown DC. It was a very liberal group of people, politically and socially liberal and somewhat aware people that were working in similar circumstances to mine. They were at a certain educational and professional level, working in certain circumstances, so I could feel like integrated into that. And the thing that saved me the second time, because I would have just walked out, all this stuff about you're going to get it sooner or later, and you're going to do our 12 holy steps, and you
Hmm.
do this, you do that.
Right.
But I got hooked on the stories. I got hooked on people's stories over and over again about that's how it was then, and this is how it is now. And the progressions and the changes, I could see it in people's faces.
Hmm.
I told a story about the lady with the floppy hat once before. I used to drink in one of my bars on 17th Street in Washington called the Fox and Hounds, which was just down the street from my OK apartment, just a block and a half away. And I would go over to it wasn't my favorite spot, but I would go in there to the Fox and start drinking. And the bartender was a friend of mine, knew me, and there were people around I'd chat with and stuff. And I'd always go in there, and I'd see at the end of the bar, I'd see this African American lady at the end of the bar, uh, late 30s, maybe, but she was always there, didn't say a word to anybody. You couldn't hardly see her face because she always wore this floppy hat, and she had her drink in front of her, and that was it. She was drinking, 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 drinking. And I recognized that lady from some years. I've been going in and out of that place since maybe the late 60s when I was in school. I used to drink there once in a while. I've been going in and out of there for a long time, and I always I thought of her. So what's the story with her, the lady with the floppy hat, right? And I went to one of these meetings. There's more evidence, right? More rationality, more facts in recovery. Because I knew that lady as the lady in the floppy hat, who was obviously a desperately sick alcoholic, uh, who one day I'm sitting in that meeting. I went to next to St. Matthew's Cathedral on Rhode Island Avenue, Rhode Island and Connecticut Avenue Northwest, in this broken down church meeting. We'd go church building. They let the AA meetings go in there. It was a real shithole, but we would go all the way up to the top of this place, and there was a meeting room without smoking. It was a smoking one, and I was in the non-smoking one. And one day I'm sitting in there, and the most incredibly well-dressed, incredibly bright, incredibly like aware and alive person was telling a story. And she told her story that touched on the Fox and Hounds. And I said, holy shit, that's the lady with the floppy hat. Because I could recognize her profile because I just see the hat. But I said, that's the lady. That impressed the shit out of me. Okay. That indicated to me that there was real recovery in that room that I had to acknowledge.
Concrete evidence that it does
Concrete
work.
evidence without this perception that these other folks had that it had something to do with some force or some
Right.
force field or some, you know, shit that came out of the air that went into your, I don't know whether it went in your ears or in your mouth. Where'd the force go? It go in other orifice? How did it enter? I don't know. It might have been sort of scatological in the end. I don't know how it entered. But it came into you somehow and filled you with this thing. Instead of just the evidence that not drinking improved your life.
There you go.
And you could go from being the person in the floppy hat to being a, pretty well-heeled executive in a government office in downtown Washington, looking like you just walked out of a great clothing store, right? With without the fucking floppy hat. So, it was impressive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And why all this other stuff that you had to have what they loved this shit, quality sobriety. What's the quality of your sobriety today, Michael? I think it's pretty good, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any difference between the sobriety that I started with and the sobriety I have now. I mean, that in itself has been quality for me, you know?
The quality is in the decision.
There you go. Yeah. I mean,
okay. The quality is in the execution of that decision, but it's not quantified by these other people that try to put a label or some sort of, I don't know, some sort of
judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On you. All right. And this goes back to, how something I picked up on very early on, which is the perception of atheists as a whole. I mean, if you identify yourself as a committed atheist in the context of this recovery world that you find yourself in, you are put in a place apart.
Yeah, your sobriety is deficient if you claim to be an atheist, because sobriety is contingent upon your spiritual health. And yeah, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
And people make judgments about you.
Right.
Now, if you're vocal about your atheism, if you're not vocal about your atheism and you sort of play along to go along and hold hands and say whatever.
Yeah, which is what I did for 10, 12 years.
It's like, you do that and you go along and then nobody's going to really notice it. They're going to say, oh, I think he's one of them, but they're not going to notice you. But as soon as you start to speak up, all right, they have a deep distrust of people who openly say that they refuse to tolerate fantasy in and of itself.
Yeah. And it's also very threatening to those people. I mean, you're questioning their belief.
Well, they
indirectly.
Right. Well, they confused your lack of tolerance for fantasy with a lack of tolerance for them.
Yeah, right.
I don't disrespect you as a person. You have a valid reason for being around anywhere there are people who are trying to get and stay sober. I would never, ever question that. But for me, if somebody tries to apply a fantasy world to my recovery that has nothing to do with me, I'm going to speak up.
Sure.
And that's a fucking problem.
Yeah.
There I go using bad language again. I think that's one of our characters. You're much nicer than I.
It'll go down on your permanent record,
Yeah, I guess they're going to have to do that because they have a thing, okay? And I've been going to I got involved in the national and international movement for this secular recovery thing uh, back in 2014, and about 11 years ago when they had that first uh, uh, convention. And I've gone to the conventions that they've had, all of them that they've
So
had, and
that's
some of them.
secular AA, right?
I guess if you have to say it, yeah, I guess that's what it is. It's like these conventions they have that are supposedly secular. And I was at the one, as you know, I invited you to come, but you said you wouldn't come. I invited you to come
Yeah,
to
I have no
beautiful
no
Orlando,
desire to participate in AA. I mean, I've gotten to a point where,
shitty hotel at the outside of Universal Orlando or whatever it was. I didn't know where I was. It was hot and buggy. I used to have to go down there all the time. I blocked all my nights in Holiday Inns in Florida selling stuff years ago. I've been all over that place. But despite that, we were there. We were there, and I was glad to be there. And I got to do my little presentation. And I was also part of a group presentation that our friend from Paris, John C., and our buddy from New York, Vic, were part of, and a very nice lady who sort of popped up on the grid from Oklahoma. And we're sitting there doing a afternoon with the atheists slot there. But we were sort of off to the side in a side room. We were not, in years past, we had been allowed on the main platform. But as things have evolved over the years, it's become more of a, programming oriented place. And when it was sort of perceived that we were anti their holy program, which I don't know how they got that impression, but
maybe because you wear on your forehead AA with an X through it, they see
no,
that coming.
I don't do it any. I don't make any bones about not being a member of
Yeah,
that
yeah,
organization.
yeah.
I don't try to integrate with them. I have no desire to be part of them and don't want to integrate with them. And the reason I go to the conventions is I've been given the impression that a hardcore atheist presence there is useful. And, we're going to be I'll be part of the virtual convention they're going to have this September, unless they get bounced after they hear this podcast. But, you know, I was reading through some of the stuff from the last convention last September, and I came up, I won't say who it was, but another presenter there was communicating with another very prominent person in one of those rooms there. And they came up with this idea that they were talking about when they were talking about the convention, and they were talking about their takeaways from the convention, right? And this lady, who I will not name, her takeaway from the convention, one of her big takeaways from the convention, was that militant atheism is just as toxic as militant theism. Think about that for a second.
There's not a lot of evidence to back that up.
No, but that's what some
Yeah,
folks think.
yeah,
And that's ridiculous. Okay. Unlike militant theists, we don't take books out of little kids' hands in school.
yeah.
Okay. We don't try to stop women from getting needed medical care that is legal in many, it's not legal in many places now because of the Roman Catholic Church, who blocks access to people's health care. You don't see atheists blocking access to anybody's health care, do you?
No,
I've never
no,
seen it.
no.
Okay. And, there may be a random nut out there that does things, but I've never seen an organized group of atheists
Well,
doing anything.
let me ask, what exactly do people mean by militant atheists, and what
Well,
activities on the part of so-called militant atheists are they accused of doing? I mean, what
well,
defines
I,
that? What
I've,
defines that?
I've, I've defined myself as a militant atheist on occasion. Although I made a joke at one of their conventions back in 2018, I said, Oh, I hear that people are all upset by the term militant. So I'm now a determined atheist. So I'm a determined
Determined. Well,
atheist.
I would consider myself a pacifist atheist.
Pacifist atheist. Well, that's because you're an old hippie, and I, I was a very bad hippie. I did all that stuff and went all those ways, but I wasn't as good a hippie as you were. You're a better hippie than I am. But I was a bad hippie. But it means a determination to tell the truth as you see it about the non existence of supernatural powers and agencies in human existence. That is militant atheism. No compromise with religion or belief or spirituality whatsoever. No compromise. That's militant atheism. Now, that is not the position even of some of our friends, but that's my position. All right. And if
Well, I would
if
think that
you
militant would be more aggressive than that. I mean,
well, militant in
it
the sense
implies
that
aggression
okay, no,
a
militant atheism is like as I define it, it's purely a question of being very definite about your belief. Okay. Other people would define militant atheism as similar to. Actually, I used the photo. As you know, I lived in Moscow for 5 years and know a bit about how things work over there. And I think I used this illustration to illustrate one of my articles that I used to publish in some of these publications. I've been doing that for a long time, and it was a photo of when the Bolsheviks blew up the largest cathedral in Moscow, down by the Moscow River near the Kremlin. It's called Christ the Redeemer Cathedral, I believe is the name of it. And there's a famous photo of these clouds of smoke where the Bolsheviks filled it with TNT and blew it up. All right. And of
well, that's
course,
militant.
that's militant.
Yes.
Now, Putin came back in the 2000s and rebuilt the place. Okay. That's the place where Pussy Riot was arrested the first time for demonstrating against the Putin stuff. I don't blow up their churches, okay? When I say militant, I mean it's a question of belief that applies to me that I do not compromise with,
Mm.
all right? Which goes back to the theme of our podcast today, which is what I rely on. I rely on the visible world, what I can see. I don't much care about what you feel about things as regards sobriety. That's your personal business.
Mm-hmm.
All I want to know is what we see about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay?
yes.
Your little feelings are not my problem. I don't hate to say it, but I don't give a shit about your little feelings.
Yeah, yeah. You're
Okay?
either sober or you're not.
You're either sober or you're not. And I really need to know how you did that and how you maintain that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you tell me that it's Jesus Christ or Buddha or Yahweh or something like that that helps keep you sober, that
There, but for the grace of God.
yeah, there, but for the grace of God, somebody talks
Yeah.
in your ear. What exactly did God tell you this morning? What was his voice like? What is he, male or female? Is he gay or straight? What's his thing? What does he talk about? Where is he coming from?
Yeah.
What does he do? Uh, God's grace. What is God? What it just doesn't fucking exist. Okay,
It seems to
so
be the only time that it's okay to talk about somebody talking to you in your head. I mean,
well,
it's
maybe it's
legitimate.
maybe it's a brain worm that's connected to
Yeah.
your anti-vax
I mean, any other time you talk about
brain.
being
Maybe it
told to
causes
do
you to
things.
put dead bear cubs in Central Park. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever it tells you to do, any kind of craziness it tells you to do. But it's really, if you tell me that that stuff works for you, I say, oh, well, that's great. But I do think that's delusional.
Hmm.
Now, am I making a judgment, or am I just stating a fact as I see it?
Well, I think
So
if you tell them that they're delusional, that is a bit of militancy.
I guess, well, I've had delusions before, but they were, and that was fairly recent. In 2022, I was in the ICU for 6 days. And when they started to bring you out of the ICU, you get something, almost everybody gets something called ICU psychosis because of all the drugs. I don't even know, you can't even know what kind. It's just, they
Yeah.
put a central line in your neck and it's all through your body, everything. And unfortunately, was coming out of it, and I had all kinds of delusions about space aliens and CIA plots and stuff like that. And I thought I was hearing stuff and all that stuff. But guess what? That was a delusion and a series of delusions based on toxic chemicals that had been, coursing through my body for 6 days. And once the chemicals started to get out, and I was in 3 different hospitals. Once I got out of the third hospital, I was pretty much okay. And I haven't heard any voices or seen any visions since, because those drugs are out of my system. Okay. That stuff is, in my mind, is a ingrained fallacy that is imbued in people, often for motivations related to outside forces that want to control you. And if you question that, if you question their wishes and dreams for a chat with grandma in an afterlife, okay, that's okay with me. But don't tell me that that stuff could possibly keep me sober. It couldn't. Could it keep you sober if somebody promised you a good old by and by after you're off the planet? What would that do?
No, it didn't. That's not what
It
kept
did.
me sober.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I went along with it. I mean, for a good 10, 12 years of going to AA and NA meetings, I went along with that delusion and thinking because it was, I was convinced that that was the only way to stay sober.
Yeah. Well, and and then when you're in those programs, you have the cases of out and out shunning. Okay. I'll
Yeah.
never forget. I was writing articles about cults in AA. I wrote a couple of series, Old Agnostic, a piece, I think it's probably still in their archives. But I was writing a piece that included an investigation of back to basics,
Mm,
those fundamentalist,
yeah.
hardcore, very hardcore back to basics
Yeah.
theism. All right.
Get down on your knees and
And
pray.
well, I'll tell you, Mike, I'm sorry if I'm being redundant if I've told this story in another episode, but it's in context with this, it's actually apt. Uh, I live in Bethesda, Maryland, which is a very highly educated, probably the highest educational rate per capita of anywhere in the United States in terms of advanced degrees. And I live just down the street from, this lower school that Obama's daughters used to go to. And it's a very liberal enclave. And uh, over 94% of my neighbors voted the right way in the last election. So it's not the kind of place where you expect to find fundamentalists. So, much to my surprise, when I was investigating back to basics, I was looking at the Washington Area Intergroup Association list because I was going to go out and find some of these places and go visit them and see what actually happened there, and then write an article agnostic about it. I went into this, much to my amazement, there was a place just on the other side of Old Georgetown Road, kind of a long walk, but within walking distance of my front door here in Bethesda, that had a large Back to Basics meeting. And I went in there and I listened to all of that stuff. And I won't go into all of the stuff, but it's real hardcore Akron, on your knees, Dr. Bob's kitchen table stuff. And, everybody gets a turn to speak there. And when it was my turn to speak, I said, well, thank you very much. I'm visiting and I'm looking into what you folks do. But I have to tell you that I'm a non-believer and I'm not a practitioner of the 12 steps or any of the things you're talking about. And I won't be back here again, but I wanted to just say who I was and why I was here, because I'm, doing a little work on investigating who and what you guys are. And as I had come into the meeting, I was warmly greeted, right? And hello, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. At the end of the meeting, I got up to leave, and it was one of the weirdest experiences I've had in that unnamed program, because people were looking. It was like I was a pane of glass. They looked right through me. It was like I was I was a ghost, okay? And it was weird because they were looking right through me, and they would no expression, no nothing on the way out of there. And I hadn't been assaultive or militant or anything. I had just said that I was a non-believer. I don't think I even said atheist to them that morning. But that was a experience that showed me the position that I was in with a subset of those people, and directly connected to my eventually never darkening any of their doors again, right? Because that was one of the points of conviction, right?
Right.
Visible world, right? I saw what I saw when I saw it, and I saw it, and then I could make a conclusion about what they thought of people like me, which is not much and not often. Now, that leads us to this so-called secular movement, where there are people that are convinced that you have to get along and go along with that organization in order to be of more use to people within it. All right. I've totally rejected that. I see their point about that. I've been round and round with arguments about some people that and that, other meetings on the Thursday night meeting I don't go to anymore, and that sort of thing, and those sort of discussions. But we have an even more insidious method of our own people trying to deal with us. All right. And they can be nice to you when they see you. They can be sweet as pie. They can acknowledge your many years of experience and blah, 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 blah. But when it comes right down to it, it comes down to this. I was listening to another podcast, which was about this meeting that I mentioned that I had been to in Orlando. And one of the very prominent people there, who will remain nameless, was speaking. And they were talking about this takeaway that this woman who had been a presenter there had, and they quoted her takeaway about militant atheism is just as toxic as militant theism, which is so fucking offensive. I can't even, I don't want to go back there right now. But they came up with something else that was very clever. Okay. And they were talking about the vehement expressions of disbelief that some of us have. I take that kind of personally. I get,
Vehement expressions.
Vehement denials, yeah, of and vehement protestations about all of this stuff. which I've had vehement feelings about since I was age 12, which is what, 64 years now. So I guess I was a vehement little sucker at age 12, probably was. And, you know, uh, some of the more clever people in that wing of things come up with uh, condescending phrases that are even more insidious than these outright accusations about what militancy means. And they sort of soft pedal it. And this phrase he came up with was a paraphrase from Hamlet, from Shakespeare. And it is, he doth protest too much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the actual line is, the lady doth protest too much.
Right.
And it's not used in the same context in the play. It's not used. See, I have this terrible, behind me, I've got all these books and stuff, this terrible habit of looking shit up and trying to figure it out and reading a little bit about it. And, I knew it was Hamlet, and I knew the phrase very well because it's a very common phrase. But what it was in the play was, he doth protest too much, was not somebody that speaks up not really being sincere about what he's saying, okay, or doubt. No, they couch it it's even more. They couch it in ways as, oh, he really wants to believe, and that's why he's so
Mm-hmm.
adamant. But in the play, the context of the play, it's Queen Gertrude actually says the line, she doth protest too much, methinks, okay? And it's within the context of the play, it's an attempt to seem more innocent than you actually are, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Within the context of how the dialogue in the play goes. So Shakespeare didn't mean that at all about us or about people that have definitive views. So you see, it's a real example of how very clever, and I'm telling you, some of these people that are in this movement, some of them are extremely clever, extremely capable, and I'm sure they've helped a lot of people on their own along the way with their books and lectures and shit. I'm not going to question any of that. But when they start applying stuff to us that isn't true, right? It's taken out of context and used as a line that has been twisted to mean what they want it to mean, then I'm in a deeper level of what we face as atheists in recovery, aren't I? I'm in sort of another, it's like, I'm in another dimension. Who said that? I'm in another dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in another dimension. Yeah, I'm in a shitstorm of bullshit is what I'm in. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tolerate it. And I don't think you tolerate it either. I've never heard you tolerate it.
Well, what I get, the line that I've gotten quite often is, there are no atheists in foxholes.
Man.
As a retort to me claiming that I'm an atheist. That it's more like, well, that's kind of cute, but in reality, if you were in a foxhole, you would be a believer. And I've always said, well, isn't this a foxhole? I mean, when you're struggling with addiction, you're in a foxhole. I mean, and
yeah, well,
I didn't resort to pretending that I had a faith in something I didn't have faith in. And there's evidence. And I have to throw in here. There's a certain amount of with regards to evidence, our rational reasoning for being sober, and there's evidence that people are sober because of the AA program and their belief in God.
We always say that.
Yes,
That's no
there's
problem.
evidence of that. So why isn't there just as much a recognition? And I recognize that as an atheist, I recognize that it's pretty clear. Yeah, there's plenty of people that are sober because and through
Great.
that whole thing. So why isn't there equal recognition to us? You know,
Because
this is evidence. I am evidence that you can be sober without having a faith in God. So
well, I think
why isn't that accepted?
deep in their psyches, they believe that maybe they think that spiritual beliefs and spiritual practice are somehow defective in terms of logic, and that our insistence upon a logical path forward is deeply threatening to them, no matter where they are on the
Yeah, yeah,
spectrum of
yeah,
belief.
yeah. Threatening.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not fantasizing about being threatened as
yeah,
atheists.
yeah.
We actually get threatened. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but our existence, our very existence seems to be a threat
yeah.
to a certain number of folks,
And
even
that
people who say they're secular,
that
because we
makes
don't
us.
go to, look at, I've got to go out to me. I've got to go visit my daughter in Tucson, and maybe we'll go up to Sedona and get a soak or something. But, I might go into a sweat lodge, but I'm not going to chant that stuff and do those things.
Mm,
Okay. I might enjoy going to one of those places, but I'm not going to believe everything they believe up in Sedona for sure.
yeah,
There are not going to be any crystals in my bag on the way home. All right. And some of if it, you go to that, that Wiccan-y kind of, sweat lodgy sort of West Coasty, you know, ashram kind of shit, and you start to question. You say, "Oh, I don't believe any of that." Okay, uh, I might enjoy getting naked and going into the sauna or the sweat lodge in those places, but I don't enjoy your bullshit with the fucking, the crystals. Okay, I'm just not going there,
yeah.
which is
But just
okay
yeah,
for me. It's no, but what's okay for you isn't necessarily okay for me. And if I question the rational validity of some of these things, it gets a commotion going.
mm,
And, I just think we need to stand up and say who and what we are. Okay. That, back to the beginning of the podcast, we had the little blurb I wrote, we base our recovery on what is seen, not what is wished for. Okay.
and that essentially is a bit of militancy. You know,
Yeah, it is.
I mean, just our mere existence is militant in that respect because it does threaten all of those beliefs.
Yeah, because I don't wish upon a star. I mean, Jiminy Cricket isn't singing to me. I mean, I don't, it's like, Peter Pan flew through the air in a book of fiction. Okay. It just, it's
Mm.
not relevant. All right. Now they'll say, oh, they look at it, oh, these old atheists, these old guys that go on and on and on and on. Well, we're actually in communication with some people who are not at Medicare or above age,
Yeah,
who are the same as,
sure.
you know, I was basically this way when I was a 12-year-old kid,
Mm.
you know, uh, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, same. So where does that leave us, Mike? I mean, we're trying to give some hope. Maybe it's a little
Yeah.
premature. Let me look at the timer. It's a little premature to use that word,
No, that's
but
good.
yeah, it's always good to think
Yeah,
about it.
yeah,
Maybe we're trying to give a little bit of a sense that it's okay for you to be centered in the way that you're centered,
yeah,
whatever that way is. Right?
yeah.
Just like, these crazy Roman Catholics and, you know, fundamentalist Christians and Buddhists or whatever they are, if it gets them centered and helps them on their journey with sobriety, I'm not going to question their sobriety or the quality of their sobriety.
Mm-hmm,
My
mm-hmm.
quality. Boy, I wish you could follow me around for a week and see what I do. My quality of life is pretty fucking high. But I don't take those videos and say, "Oh, where's my bad quality of life?" I could go follow around and, see who I live with and how I live and where we go and what I do and what I try to write and what I try to think and how I try to work and where I try to travel in the world. Quality of what? Okay? It's none of your fucking business. And the basics that we're talking about here are going back and trying to contradict the fact that most people are not convinced by facts. I think some people are convinced by facts. Maybe the majority of people are not convinced by facts. I think our current political reality would seem to support that, about the vast numbers of people not being convinced at all by the facts
Yeah.
right before them. But I think we're trying to say that you can get along and have a good, long, productive life as a sober person solely based on appreciating what you can see,
Mm-hmm.
what's observable,
Yeah.
what's the reality of the situation that makes life meaningful for you. I would not want I if there was some sort of fantasy universe out there that had the influence on human life, I would use a cliche that's been often repeated by non-believers, that I truly believe if there was something that was having a direct agency and manipulating the course of human life, I would look at that entity as the most evil piece of shit in the universe because of what happens to human beings in real time here.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the planet, what happens to babies, what happens to children, what happens to societies. Okay, if that thing was actually directing, oh, it's none of my business, it's God's will, God's gonna, fuck God's will. Okay, because whatever that will is, if it's actually doing stuff here, is evil. I don't want to have anything to do with it, if I ever thought that that might even be possible. But that would be a logical way of looking at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be logic, right? Okay, if it's directing human affairs, what? To take a
Yeah.
visit with me down to the cancer ward at Children's Hospital and tell me how that has to do with
Yeah. Yeah.
somebody's will.
That's the hard evidence right in front of our eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, or the daily reality of babies in Gaza, or whatever one of a
Yeah.
million things you
Yeah.
could talk about, or the poor young boys on the both sides on the front line in Ukraine. What are you talking about?
Mm.
Will. No, it's human. It's the agency of human beings that gets twisted in a
Mm-hmm.
certain way, and disease is a luck of the draw based on environment and genetics and other things, uh, toxins that you induce into your body, like we did. All right, you're talking about your bronchitis. I've been told by various doctors that some of the stuff that's wrong with me, even though I haven't had a drink in going on 39 years, that some of the stuff that's wrong with me today is directly related to what I did between age 15 and age 38.
Yep. Yep.
I've been flat told that. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's enough stuff that happens to us because of what we actually did than getting all twisted up in a fantasy world about something that's impossible to happen to you. I'd much rather understand and own up to my own actions and my own desires and my own reactions in a real world with real situations. based on what we perceive. Huh?
Yeah.
Do I know about I only know about black holes because I believe in the science of astronomy and, their radio physics and astrophysics and those sorts of things, and the types of energy levels that are produced by the creation of stars and all that other stuff. I believe that. Now, I can't directly see it, but I can look at the evidence that it's all been measured,
Mm-hmm.
and that those theories that used to be theories are realities. And when we look at the images from the Hubble, we see new things all the time about things that happened billions of years ago,
Sure.
because it's visible, it's perceivable.
Or
Science has
it can
shown it.
be as simple as knowing that if I drink, my life will go downhill. If I don't
Well,
drink, my life gets better.
yeah, well,
That's
yeah,
just hardcore, solid evidence.
yeah. I mean,
I've a lot of trial and error. I admit I've participated in a lot of trial and error to figure that out, but it's essentially scientific. There's no spiritual connection with that at all. It's very physical. It's the bottle is either in my hand or it isn't, and that's very simple, black and white reality, without any other explanation is needed at all.
well, the 23 years that I drank took me to a point that I never thought I would go to, where I wanted to extinguish myself because I'm not in that mindset. That sort of thing doesn't cross my mind in a normal state of being and affairs. I love life. I love being alive. I love perceiving and doing things in the world. And that alcohol was taking that away from me.
Mm,
Almost took it all away from me.
sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, going back to that, on a daily basis, you have to remind yourself that that decision that you made gives you what you have today,
Yeah.
not some bullshit
Yeah. It
from
wasn't a
another
decision
world.
made by anyone else or any other entity. It was a decision that we
Any other
made
entity. No,
personally.
but we do have to acknowledge the great help that our friends and the example of the people that we go to meetings with and who we see and who we know, what they do for us as examples,
Yes.
as points of reference to what they are
Yeah.
now compared to what they were before.
Yeah.
And that's basically the essence of the whole thing. Um, I don't know what's in this for anybody but us, but I suspect that there are fellow atheists out there that have experienced some things related to what we've discussed today. And that, perhaps, I think, Michael, perhaps we've been trying to transmit a little hope to the heathens out, the real
Yeah.
the people that are adamant, sort of. Oh, can I use the word militant? I guess, yeah. Fuck it.
Well,
The word militant, yeah, they go
yeah.
fuck themselves. The word militant crosses my mind in the sense that we're certain of what we know because it's what we see,
Yeah. Yeah.
not what we wish for, but what we see.
Concrete reality.
Concrete reality, which leads us to a situation in our little world where we can actually produce some hope.
Hope is where
Did
it's
I
at.
say the
Yep.
word? Did
Yep.
I say the word? You'll attest to that, won't you,
Yes.
Michael?
Yes. I mean, the whole point of doing this is,
Yeah, and we'll also attest to the point that we are at the end of our time here in
yeah,
this episode,
perfect.
and that it's time for us to say goodbye for now and wish everyone peace and
Peace
love.
and love, man. Yeah.
Peace and
Peace and
love,
love.
a
Yeah.
thing that's in short supply,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we hope you get a little bit of that somehow, somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
Okay, time to go. We'll see you. Bye now. Bye now, guys.
Peace and love.